There was a time when being American meant receiving a warm welcome almost anywhere in the world. But today, that's changing fast. With shifting politics, controversial policies, and cultural tensions, some countries are making it loud and clear. Americans aren't as welcome as they used to be. From anti-American protests to strict travel warnings, these places have lost their love for the U.S. Some are rejecting American tourists, refusing visas, or even warning locals to stay away from U.S. visitors. Today, we're counting down the top 10 countries that no longer like the United States, and trust me, some of them will shock you. Before you plan that next vacation, you'll want to hear this first. Let's dive in. Number 10, Brazil. For years, Brazil had a love-hate relationship with the United States. Sometimes an ally, sometimes a critic. But in 2025, things hit a breaking point. Under President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, Brazil has moved closer to China and Russia, openly challenging U.S. power in Latin America. The country now prefers BRICS nations for trade, with over 30% of its global deals now done in Chinese yuan instead of U.S. dollars. At the same time, Washington's sanctions on Brazilian soybeans and beef have only made things worse, fueling more resentment against the U.S. But the biggest shock? Brazil just rejected a military deal with the U.S. and instead strengthened defense ties with Russia. In just 2 years, Brazilian arms imports from Moscow skyrocketed by 45%. And it's not just politics. Brazilians themselves are turning against America. A 2025 Pew Research poll shows that only 34% of Brazilians see the U.S. favorably, a huge drop from 52% in 2020. With rising anti-American feelings and shifting alliances, Brazil is sending a clear message: it's done following the U.S. and is forging its own path. Number 9, Turkey. For years, Turkey and the U.S. have had a rocky relationship, but 2025 might be the final straw. As a NATO member, Turkey was once a key U.S. ally in the Middle East. But under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's bold and independent leadership, Turkey is now making its own rules. One of the biggest shocks came in early 2025 when Turkey ignored U.S. warnings and bought more Russian S-400 missile defense systems. Washington hit back with more sanctions, making an already tense relationship even worse. But it's not just military moves. Turkey is turning to China for business. Trade between the two countries has soared past $50 billion a year. And it doesn't stop there. Turkey has even shown interest in joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a powerful security alliance led by China and Russia. This is a clear sign that Turkey is stepping away from Western influence. And guess what? Anti-American feelings in Turkey are skyrocketing. A 2025 survey found that 68% of Turkish citizens now see the U.S. as a threat to national security. With Turkey rebuilding its economy and military ties outside of the West, one thing is clear: its future may no longer include Washington. Number 8, Saudi Arabia. For years, Saudi Arabia was one of America's strongest allies in the Middle East. But now, that friendship is falling apart. And the biggest reason? Oil. Saudi Arabia is done following U.S. economic rules and is now getting closer to China and Russia. In early 2025, the kingdom made a game-changing move. It announced that a big chunk of its oil sales would now be priced in Chinese yuan instead of U.S. dollars. This is a direct threat to the petrodollar system that has kept America's financial power strong for decades. The numbers don't lie. Saudi oil exports to China have hit a record 2 million barrels per day, while exports to the U.S. have plunged by 40% in just 5 years. And it's not just oil. Military ties are also crumbling. When the Biden administration froze some arms sales to Saudi Arabia over human rights issues, the kingdom fired back hard. Instead of waiting for U.S. approval, Saudi Arabia signed a massive $15 billion defense deal with Russia. At the same time, Saudi Arabia is cozying up to BRICS, officially joining the powerful economic bloc in 2024. With all these bold moves, one thing is crystal clear: Saudi Arabia is done asking for Washington's permission. It's now carving its own future, and America may not be part of it. Number 7, South Africa. South Africa and the US were never the closest of friends, but in 2025, the relationship has completely changed. Instead of looking to the West, South Africa is now standing firmly with China and Russia. A huge turning point came when South Africa refused to support US sanctions on Russia and instead expanded its trade and military ties with Moscow. Trade between South Africa and Russia hit a record high of $3.5 billion in 2025, showing just how much the country is moving away from American influence. Meanwhile, Washington has been pushing South Africa to back Western policies on African affairs. But the response? Total rejection. South African leaders have slammed U.S. military involvement in Africa, calling it a modern form of colonial control. And the people? They're not happy with the U.S. either. Massive anti-American protests have erupted in Cape Town and Johannesburg, with thousands marching against U.S. foreign policies. A shocking 2025 survey revealed that only 27% of South Africans now have a positive view of the U.S. That's a steep drop and a clear message. South Africa is taking a new path, and it no longer includes Washington. Number 6, India. For years, India and the US were strong partners, mainly because both worried about China's growing power. But 2025 has changed everything. India is now making it clear that it won't just follow Washington's lead anymore. The biggest shock? India is going all in with BRICS, helping build new financial systems that challenge the West. And despite US sanctions, India has expanded trade with Russia, buying even more oil. Bilateral trade between India and Russia has hit a record-breaking $50 billion. Washington is not happy, but it doesn't stop there. The US wanted India to stop relying on Russian weapons, but India did the opposite, signing a massive $7 billion defense deal for Russian fighter jets and missiles. This has only made tensions worse between the two countries. And in another shocking move, India has ignored US warnings about Chinese tech giant Huawei and allowed it to continue working on India's 5G networks. The US sees this as a major security risk, but India is standing its ground. Even Indian public opinion about the US is changing fast. A 2025 Pew poll found that only 42% of Indians now see the US favorably, a sharp drop from 55% in 2020. With India pushing for a stronger, independent foreign policy, one thing is clear: it is no longer willing to just follow Washington's playbook. Number 5, Mexico. For years, Mexico and the US were tangled in a love-hate relationship. But in 2025, things have taken a drastic turn. Trade fights, immigration battles, and political tensions have pushed Mexico to rethink its ties with its northern neighbor. The biggest shock? China has officially replaced the US as Mexico's top trading partner, with trade between them soaring past $13 billion a year. Mexico is no longer relying on the US for business and is now making stronger deals with China and Latin American nations. But that's not all. The US has been tightening its border policies, making it even harder for Mexican immigrants to cross legally. Mexico's president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, is furious, calling Washington's actions hostile and unacceptable. And in a shocking twist, Mexico has invited Russian and Chinese companies to take over energy projects that were once run by US firms. This has sent tensions through the roof. One thing is crystal clear: Mexico isn't looking to the US for its future anymore. It's building new partnerships, and Washington is no longer at the top of the list. Number 4, Germany. For years, Germany was one of America's strongest allies in Europe. But in 2025, things have changed. The relationship between Berlin and Washington is more strained than ever. The biggest reason? Energy and money. Germany has been struggling with sky-high energy costs ever since the West sanctioned Russia. Even though the US warned against it, Germany has quietly resumed buying some Russian energy, saying that keeping its economy stable is more important. This has put Germany and the US on a collision course. And that's not all. Germany is furious about US trade policies. The Inflation Reduction Act, which gives big subsidies to American-made products, has left German industries feeling betrayed German officials have accused Washington of hurting Europe's economy just to benefit American businesses. But the most shocking move? Germany is building its own military strength without relying on the US. In early 2025, Germany increased its funding for the EU's independent defense programs, moving away from NATO, which is mostly funded by the US. And guess what? The German people are on board. A 2025 YouGov poll found that 60% of Germans believe the US has too much control over Europe, and that Germany should make its own foreign policy decisions. With Berlin choosing to put its own interests first, it's clear that Germany's loyalty to Washington is fading fast. Number 3, Russia. In 2025, Russia and the US are locked in their fiercest rivalry since the Cold War. The conflict over Ukraine has turned their relationship ice cold, and Moscow is now directly challenging Washington's power. But here's the shocking part. Russia has found ways to survive Western sanctions. Instead of struggling, Moscow has built stronger trade ties with China, India, and other BRICS nations. In 2025, Russia and China created a new banking system that completely avoids US control, reducing reliance on the dollar. This is a huge blow to Washington's economic power. And militarily, Russia is on the move. Moscow is expanding its military presence around the world, supplying advanced weapons to Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela. Even more shocking, US intelligence reports show that Russia is building new military bases in Africa and Latin America. Washington is deeply alarmed. Meanwhile, Russian public opinion has turned even more anti-American. In 2025, a poll showed that 90% of Russians believe the US is actively trying to destroy their country. Russian state media paints America as the world's biggest troublemaker, and the Kremlin is pushing back hard against US influence everywhere. With Moscow and Washington clashing on every front, Russia has become one of America's biggest enemies. Number 2, Iran. It's no secret that Iran and the US have never been friends, but in 2025, their rivalry has exploded like never before. One of the biggest shocks? Iran has signed a massive $10 billion weapons deal with Russia, getting powerful fighter jets and advanced missile defense systems. Washington is deeply worried that Iran's growing military will make it even more powerful in the region. And that's not all. Iran is now closer than ever to China. A new 25-year deal between Iran and China means billions of dollars in investments for Iran's oil and infrastructure. Now China buys almost 40% of Iran's oil, making Iran less dependent on the West. But the most shocking development? The nuclear issue has completely collapsed. In 2025, Iran walked away from nuclear negotiations, refusing to follow any US restrictions. In response, Washington hit Iran with new sanctions, but Iran kept pushing forward, expanding its nuclear program. And the Iranian people? Their anger at the US is stronger than ever. According to a 2025 Gallup poll, over 85% of Iranians now see America as an enemy. Massive government-backed protests fill the streets, denouncing US policies with loud chants and burning American flags. With Iran growing closer to Russia and China, its opposition to the US is stronger than ever. The message is loud and clear. Iran will not bow to Washington. Number 1, China. In 2025, China is leading the fight against US influence like never before. The rivalry between Beijing and Washington has hit its most dangerous level yet, with tensions rising in economics, military power, and technology. But here's the shocking truth. China is actively working to replace the US dollar as the world's top currency. Major economies like Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and Russia are now trading in Chinese yuan instead of dollars. In 2025, China launched a digital yuan project, speeding up the world's shift away from US financial control. And militarily, China is flexing its muscles. The Chinese military has expanded in the South China Sea, building more military bases and increasing naval patrols. But the biggest flashpoint? Taiwan. Beijing has warned the US to stop selling weapons to Taiwan, but Washington has sent even more warships to the Pacific. The risk of a direct US-China showdown has never been higher. Meanwhile, China is racing past the US in technology. Despite American sanctions, Chinese companies like Huawei and Alibaba are dominating artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and even 6G networks. The US is falling behind fast. Inside China, anti-American feelings are exploding. A 2025 poll found that 88% of Chinese citizens believe the US is trying to destroy China's rise. With China growing stronger in money, military, and technology, it's not just rejecting US power, it's preparing to replace it. What does this mean for the future? As China, Russia, and other nations push back against Washington, America's global dominance is crumbling. Could this be the beginning of a new world order? What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more shocking insights.